Gunfire cracked and rolled off the red cliffs of Red Hollow, opening a ledger of blood that had never been paid. Samuel Drayton collapsed on the saloon floor, a red stain spreading across his white shirt. Just before he died, he meant to reveal where he had hidden $70,000 in gold, but his last words unravelled with his final breath. That treasure belonged to the Silver Vultures, the most ruthless outlaws on the frontier. In the dark corner, Jack Iron Wolf Callahan stared at the body, his eyes as cold as steel. 3 months chasing the trail of that gold, and now his only lead lay dead. All that remained was a single name, Clara Drayton, the daughter of a traitor. Out there, she was on the run, carrying her father's guilt and a debt of blood left unpaid. 6 months later, fate drove her to Iron Ridge, where a marriage was about to bind two enemies with gold, blood, and destiny. If you want to see what happens when love collides with guilt, hit like, subscribe, and get ready for the next chapter. The New Mexico sun beat down on the grasslands of Iron Ridge, where thousands of cattle moved like endless brown waves. Jack Callahan rode through the wooden gate, road dust caked on his coat and wind-burnt face. After 3 months pushing a herd across the border country, all he wanted was a hot soak and the creak of his old wooden bed. But Gideon Callahan, his father, had other plans. "You will marry Clara Drayton this Sunday." The words rang out in a study that smelled of leather and tobacco and hit Jack like a blow. Gideon's eyes allowed no argument. Maps of land hung on the walls. A kingdom he had wrestled into being with sweat, blood, and sometimes a gun barrel. "The Drayton place borders us to the south," he said evenly. "Together, we will control the whole Red Hollow Valley." Jack's fists tightened until his knuckles went white. "You are turning marriage into a transaction. I cannot." Gideon leaned back, his gaze as hard as iron. "Everything out here is a transaction, including love. She needs a roof. I need her land. That is the end of it." But Clara Drayton was not a pawn that could be pushed into place. The next morning, when her carriage rolled into the yard, Jack sensed something larger coming. She stepped down with a calm that bordered on dangerous, dark brown hair tied high, a travel dress dusty from the road, but eyes clear and unflinching. "Mr. Callahan," she said, voice soft but firm. "It is not Sunday yet, so you may call me Miss Drayton." There was something in that look defiance, laced with weariness, that made a wall inside Jack begin to crack. He understood she carried secrets, and perhaps danger, but he could not turn away. The ceremony was quick in the town's small chapel. No flowers, no champagne, only a wheezing organ and a handful of witnesses. When Jack lifted the veil, he did not find the weakness his father expected. He found a flame fierce, solitary, so alive it seemed to burn away the space between them. When Clara said, "I do," her voice was steady to the point of cold, but her hand trembled. That night, in the silent hallways of the big house, they stood facing each other, two strangers bound by paper, drawn together by something deeper and far more dangerous. "Jack," she said, almost a whisper, "there is something I need to tell you." Night fell over Iron Ridge, in the pale gold glow of oil lamps. Clara Drayton was no longer in her road dust dress. She wore a white nightgown that flowed like silk, the thin fabric draping her slender frame so that every movement rippled like a small wave across a still lake. Jack Callahan stood by the hearth, trying to keep his eyes respectful, but when she stepped closer, every ounce of resolve dissolved. "My father left behind many debts," Clara said, her voice unsteady but resolute. "Bad men are hunting for money. They believe I am hiding. I do not want to drag your family into this, but I have nowhere else to go." The room felt as heavy as Gunsmoke. Jack said nothing for a long moment, listening to the wind tapping the window. He moved closer, close enough to catch the lavender in her hair and the quickened pulse at her throat. "How bad is it?" he asked. "The kind of bad that ends with a headstone," she answered, looking straight at him. Her honesty stunned him. In a land where everyone wore a mask, she chose the truth, knowing it might kill her. "Then we face it together," he said, and he meant it with his whole heart. That night, they did not share a bed, but they shared something rarer trust. In the days that followed, Clara surprised the entire ranch. She did not hide in the shade like a cast-off lady. She rolled up her sleeves and worked. She helped deliver a breech calf, soothed stubborn colts, and spoke to the cowhands with a crisp authority that turned heads. Jack watched and understood. She was not a woman who needed sheltering. She was someone who could stand beside him in any storm. One evening, with the pasture gilded by sunset, Jack asked, "Have you ever fired a gun?" Clara smiled faintly and shook her head. "My father said women should not hold a gun." "The end. Your father was wrong about many things," he said, drawing a Colt .45 from his belt. He passed it to her, then stepped behind and set his hands over hers. "Feel its weight," he murmured, breath warm at her ear. "Do not fight the recoil. Let it lead." The first shot went wide. The second struck dead center. She turned, cheeks flushed with excitement, eyes bright as flame. They stood so close, Jack could hear her breath blend with his. Her lips parted, her gaze lifted to his face, and the world narrowed to a single, fragile, blazing moment. A shout from the ridge shattered the spell. Black smoke rose. The southern range was on fire. The fire ate the night sky. Jack and Clara rode hard, sweat mixing with smoke and ash. When they reached the southern pasture, the wind was so wild it gave the flames a life of their own, mad, ravenous, eager to devour everything the Callahans had built. Clara did not retreat. She cast off her dress, pulled on men's work clothes, wrapped a kerchief over her face, and fought beside Jack and the hands with anything that would beat the flames back. In that flickering hell-light, her dark hair was grey with ash, her skin smoke-streaked, but her eyes burned with a strength nothing could smother. At dawn, they stood amid blackened grass. Exhausted, skin gritty with soot, hair reeking of char. Clara's shirt had torn, bearing a clean line of skin at her shoulder. Jack reached to wipe a smear of ash there, a touch both gentle and reckless. "You do not have to stay," he said, voice rough from smoke and something deeper. "I have to," she answered, taking his hand and pressing it to her cheek, "because this is my home now." The kiss came as naturally as sunrise. Their mouths met, tasting of ash and smoke and a promise still unspoken. In that moment, every wall, every scheme, every fear fell away. But peace never lingers long in the West. 3 days after the fire, the body of Tommy Harris, the young ranch hand, was found by the creek, riddled with bullets. A scrap of paper was pinned to his shirt. "Tell Clara Drayton I am coming to take back what is mine. J.C." In the study, Gideon Callahan slammed a fist on the desk, the sound like thunder. "You brought trouble into my house, girl." Clara sat straight, hands shaking slightly, but her voice unchanged. "My father did not only owe money. He stole $70,000 from Jacob Crow's gang right before he died. He told me where it is hidden, in the caves near Devil's Canyon. Crow has hunted me for 6 months." The air went ice cold. Gideon glared. "You have dragged the devil to our door." "Father," Jack cut in, his tone sharp as a knife. "That is enough. It will destroy everything I built," Gideon roared. "Maybe," Jack said, But if I must choose between you and the woman I love, I choose both, because she is already part of me." That night, Clara stepped into Jack's room. Moonlight poured through the window, laying silver across her hair. "I cannot let you lose everything because of me," she whispered. "You are everything," Jack answered, drawing her into his arms. They came together through the long dark, not only with passion, but with the desperate hope of two souls that had found each other in a storm. At dawn, she was gone, a small note left on the table. "I will not let my sins ruin you. Live happy, my love. C." They captured Clara Drayton less than 10 miles from Iron Ridge. Jack Callahan found the signs where the trail angled west, a shred of her dress snagged on barbed wire, fresh hoofprints, and ground torn by a struggle. When he knelt and touched a faint smear of blood in the dust, his heart seemed to stop. "We will bring her home," he said, his voice low enough to raise a chill. Gideon Callahan, a man who had always trusted land more than his own son, stood silent for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Take my gun. I am coming with you." There. From the kitchen, Maria Vega, the aging Mexican housekeeper, stepped out with a gleaming Winfield rifle. Her eyes were no longer gentle. "I rode with Los Cuervos for 3 years," she said, voice quiet and cold. "It is time the past did some work for the present." They tracked the signs to Devil's Canyon, where red cliffs rose like walls of blood. Wind screamed through the chasms, carrying the taste of iron and death. Below, Jacob Crow's campfire burned like the eye of a demon in the dark. Clara knelt on the ground, bound tight. Her dress was shredded, dried blood streaked her cheek, but her gaze stayed steady, unbroken. Crow circled her, a crooked smile, lit by firelight. "You are a pretty thing," he said, "but if I do not get my money back, that face will not be worth a dime." From the cliff, Jack sighted down his Winchester, breath slow and metallic cool. Beside him, Gideon and Maria settled into position. When Clara glanced up and found his eyes through smoke and flame, she smiled, small, certain. Then the guns spoke. Hell broke open. Bullets shredded the air and sparked off rock. Maria shot with terrifying precision. Each pull of the trigger took a life. Gideon fought like an old lion, hands trembling with age but eyes still razor sharp. Crow yanked Clara up as a shield, pressing a gun to her temple. "Drop the irons, Callahan, or I will paint the dirt with your wife's brains." No. The night went still and heavy. Jack held his breath, finger tight on the trigger. Clara moved first. With a quick twist, she dropped out of his grasp, a motion she had learned with Jack on the target range. The shot cracked. Jack's bullet smashed into Crow's shoulder, knocking the gun from his hand. Jack leapt from the cliff, hit the red dust, and drove into Crow. They fought in a storm of fists, sand, and blood. Crow swung with the madness of a man losing everything. Jack hit with the power of a man fighting for the woman he loves. "Jack!" Clara's voice rang out, shaking yet strong. He saw the fear and the hope in her eyes, and from that he drew more than strength. The last punch landed. Crow sagged, out cold in the red grit. The remaining outlaws dropped their guns. Maria stepped forward, eyes like steel, and no one dared move. When Crow woke, his hands were tied with the same rope that had bound Clara. "Where is the money?" Jack asked, voice heavy as falling rock. Clara guided them into a hidden cave, torchlight glinting off old canvas sacks stuffed with gold and silver. She stood still, eyes lowered, and said softly, "This is blood money. Every coin carries someone's pain." When the territorial lawmen arrived, they turned it all over. Only a small portion the part Crow had stolen from the bank was kept to repay the victims. A small piece of justice, but truer than any gold they had ever seen. 3 days after the bloody fight at Devil's Canyon, the The wind no longer smelled of gunpowder. Morning lay strangely quiet over the grasslands of Iron Ridge. Jack Callahan leaned on the fence and watched Clara work a skittish young horse. She spoke to the colt in a low, steady voice, her hand sure and calming. In that woman, Jack saw a strength that did not boast a centered stillness, earned only by those who had walked through fire. Bootsteps sounded behind him. Gideon Callahan stopped at his side, salt and pepper hair tousled, eyes tired but warmer than Jack had ever seen. He watched his daughter-in-law for a long time and said, "Rough as wind through grit. That girl is good for you, Jack." Jack turned, the hint of a smile in his eyes. "I know, Father." They stood in silence, while the wind combed a half-burned field. Gideon bowed his head and let out a long breath, part pride, part something like regret. "I was wrong," he said. "Wrong to think I could run your life the way I run a ranch. Your mother would have lit into me if she was still here." He set a hand on Jack's shoulder and squeezed. "I am proud of you for the man you have become, and for the woman you chose to walk beside you." No more words were needed. Forgiveness passed between them, not through tears, but through understanding and quiet, the language of people who have lost much and learned more. 1 year later, morning sunlight gilded the porch of the new house, a wedding gift Gideon had left them. Clara stood on the steps, her hand resting over her belly, where a small life was growing. In the yard below, Jack worked the remuda, muscles moving in the bronzed light. He was different now. The man who once lived in his father's shadow had become his own self, a builder, not an heir. When he looked up and saw her watching, his smile came like sunrise. He climbed the steps and wrapped her from behind, whispering at her ear. "What are you thinking?" "About what might have been different," she said. "If I had not run, if you had not followed, if your father had not forgiven." Jack smiled and laid his hand over hers on her belly. "But you did run, I did follow, and he did forgive. Now we begin again, our way." In the distance, the sun slipped behind the red hills, painting the sky with gold and crimson. The west was still wild, still dangerous, but they knew that together they were stronger than any storm. Clara turned and kissed him soft, as a homecoming, bright with hope, and alive with a new beginning. Under that wide sky, they understood that the finest thing they had found was not gold, not land, not a name, but each other. Hearts forged in fire burn brightest. Love that survives danger endures the longest. Sunset bled across the cliffs of Devil's Canyon, turning the valley into a sea of red. Wind whistled through narrow cuts smelling of rust and gunsmoke, while below, the silver vulture's fires burned like a demon's eyes. Clara Drayton knelt, bound to the earth. Her dress hung in rags, dirt, and blood streaked her face, but her gaze did not waver. Before her, Jacob Crow, the gang's leader, paced like a hunting cat, voice rough and merciless. "You can keep your life, Miss Drayton, if you tell me where the gold is. If you do not—" He raised his Colt with a thin smile. That pretty face becomes a memory. High on the cliff, Jack Callahan pressed into the stock of his Winchester. Through the sight, every detail cut sharp as a blade. The bruise on her cheek, a strand of sweat, damp hair, the look in Clara's eyes when she realized he was there. In the middle of hell, she still believed. He signaled to Gideon and Maria Vega, hidden on the flanks. One nod and the first shot cracked. The ravine erupted like a furnace. Bullets hissed, sparking off stone. Gideon's shots fell from above, each one surgical. Maria moved like a ghost, her rifle singing a warrior's hymn. Outlaws dropped, but Crow stood fast. He hauled Clara tight as a shield, gun pressed to her temple. "Drop your iron, Callahan, or I will give her a farewell she will not feel." The air stretched taut as a bowstring. Jack narrowed his eye to the sight. Clara gave the smallest nod trust without a net. She threw herself sideways, rolling free. Jack squeezed the trigger. The bullet punched Crow's left shoulder. His gun spun into the dust. Jack vaulted the ledge, hit the red earth, and slammed into him. They fought, a savage tangle of fists, grit, and rage. Crow swung with a loser's desperation. Jack struck with a protector's fury. Jack? Clara's voice wavered, but it carried strength. He lifted his eyes, found hers, and from that look drew everything he needed. The final blow landed. Crow went down, face in the red sand. Silence fell. The last of the silver vultures dropped their weapons, frozen by Maria Vega's blade-cold stare. When Crow woke, his hands were tied with the rope that had bound Clara. "Where is the money?" Jack asked through his teeth. Clara led them into a cave, hidden deep in the rock. Torchlight flared over old burlap sacks, heavy with gold and silver, a hard, cold shine that smelled like guilt. "This is blood money," she said, soft but steady. "Every dollar is stained with someone's pain." When the territorial law arrived, they turned over the haul, keeping only what Crow had stolen from the bank to repay the victims. The rest went back to the families who had suffered. A small justice, but enough to wash the stain from the name Drayton. 3 days after the battle at Devil's Canyon, the valley held only wind. No more gunshots, no more smoke, only a quiet, so deep it made you forget this place had been hell. Life began to return on the grasslands of Iron Ridge. Jack Callahan leaned on a fence and watched Clara soothe a young horse. She spoke in a near whisper, hands gentle and sure. He realized she had not merely survived, she had gentled the storm inside herself. Gideon Callahan came up behind him, a faint scent of cigar smoke on the breeze. His eyes were no longer iron hard. He stood beside his son and watched the family's newest bride in silence. "She is a good woman," Gideon said at last. Jack nodded, a smile warming his gaze. "I know, Father." Between them stretched a new kind of quiet, not challenge, not argument, but understanding born of loss. After a long pause, Gideon sighed, heavy and warm. "I used to think I knew what was right. You showed me something else. Your mother would be proud." He set a hand on Jack's shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. No more words were needed. In that grip lived forgiveness and a mending of father and son, forged by smoke, blood, and love. 1 year later, morning blazed over the porch of their new timber house, a wedding gift Gideon left before retiring to Santa Fe. Clara stood on the steps, her palm resting on her belly, where their first child stirred. In the yard, Jack worked the horses, a smile flickering every time she called out. He had changed. The man who once only followed orders had become a leader not by force, but by trust. When he looked up, their eyes met, and time stepped aside. He climbed the steps and circled her from behind. "What are you thinking?" he asked, voice low and easy as morning breath. "About what might have been different," she said. "If I had not run, if you had not found me, if your father had not forgiven, and—" Jack smiled and set his hand over hers. "But you did run, I did find you, and he did forgive. Now we can truly live." Far off, the sun sank behind the red mountains, washing the sky in orange and deep violet. The wind rolled through the valley, carrying the smells of new grass and warm earth. Clara turned and kissed him. It was no longer a kiss of fear or flight, but one of peace, a love tempered by fire and loss. Under the vast western sky, they knew the real treasure lay not in gold, land, or reputation, but in hearts tempered together. Hearts forged in fire burn brightest. Love that endures danger grows strongest. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share so you can catch the next chapters.